Hello.
You hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, thank God. It's always a worry for me.
It is. And I met with a student earlier today and could not get anything to work. It was a shit show, but
Yeah, I had that happen to me not too long ago. I was trying to do accreditation stuff for the firefighting accreditation, and I couldn't get the video to work. He couldn't hear me. Then he could hear me, but he couldn't see me. Then he could see me, but he couldn't hear me. I'm like, I'm gonna have a stroke here. So finally did a Zoom meeting and that worked. I don't
uh,
if I try to use like a speaker or a microphone with the headset or something like that, if I use anything other than the computer speaker and sound, when I go to turn it back on again, it's all screwed up. So I don't know what the hell. I give up. I just don't mess with anything anymore.
right.
Just leave it the way it is.
So do you have a PowerPoint or anything, or are you just gonna
Yeah,
just
nothing.
talk? Okay,
We talk.
just talk. Okay.
If anybody wants to, chime in and ask a question or add something to it or talk about something different, by all means. I'm just
Sounds
kind of
good.
winging it, but not really. No,
That'll work. That'll work.
like I said, it's just kind of one of those things. I kind of feel like the longer you're in this game, the more you forget about the
The
simple
basics.
things. Yeah,
Yeah,
the basic stuff.
very true. Ugh. Well, we have 14 in the waiting room. There's like 60 some that signed up, so we'll see.
You must not have told them that I was going to be talking then.
They know that's why they're all signing up.
Whatever. Hmm.
My gosh.
So you just want to make this like a conversation between you and I.
Sure.
Tell somebody wants to chime in, we'll just
Yep.
kind of go down the list here, and
I have the outline here.
if you want to follow it or if you want to skip anything, just feel free.
Okay,
Or if you want to add anything else in, fire away.
so you've never ever had to pull somebody out of a grain bin, huh?
Nope.
That's
I
pretty,
I have never had the misfortune of being on one of those calls.
that's good.
I've been close. I know somebody who actually survived one.
Gosh.
And yeah, that's why I put it on here. The somehow how he survived, I don't know. I mean, he got sucked down in there, not over his head, but he got sucked down, and they wanted to fly him out. He's like, no, he didn't even want to go to the hospital,
Oh my
but
God.
he was freezing, and I've never been in a grain bin, never had anything to do with a grain bin before. I would imagine, like on a day like today, they're hotter than hell inside.
Oh, yeah, they
And a
are.
couple of months from now, it's like a freezer,
Yeah.
but that's the kind of stuff. I mean, again, though, going back to the first thing you learn in the first chapter of the book is pay attention to hazards that are going to hurt you. Your safety is most important always.
Yep.
And that's probably the easiest thing for people to forget. They focus on what they see in front of them. Somebody's in trouble and they get tunnel vision, and that's how we die.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
I'm going to be to get that. And I don't even think really, I don't think it's really a hero mentality. I think it's just they get so focused on what they think they need to do, and they start thinking about what they need to do, and they forget about themselves.
Well, they want to save the person. And I think too, like sometimes we just so badly want that person to live that
Yeah.
you just, I don't know. I,
And the sad thing is, I mean, there's more than just grain bins. You got manure pits and,
yeah,
all kinds of ungodly things. And not to mention, confined space and all that kind of stuff. I mean, those things are death traps waiting for us to make the mistake of
yeah,
jumping in. There's nothing you can do. You're not equipped in any way, shape, or form to help somebody in a grain bin or a manure pit or a confined space. You have nothing to get in there and get them out with.
yep.
You're going to climb in and become another body. That's all that's going to happen.
I was asking the um Volga guys, they had a silo thing here a couple weeks ago, and they ended up calling Brookings came, I think, with their ladder truck. I'm not even quite sure what all went down, and I think they'd also called Sioux Falls. Um, oh, why can't I say it now?
I don't know.
Task force.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, and there's about the only thing you can do is start cutting holes in the side and try to get the grain out of it.
yeah,
Got to give it a place to go. You're not going to, if that person got sucked down in there because it started shifting, it's like trying to pull them out of a half-dried cement pit. I mean, you're not going to be able to get them out. You got to get the grain out away from them. And there's no ambulance crew in this country is skilled and equipped to be able to get down in there and do anything for them.
yeah.
That's
Oh,
just
Lauren Olson is going to be on tonight.
no.
If
Gosh,
it's our Lauren,
huh. Haven't seen her for, gosh, I can't even remember the last time I saw her.
she's back working in Brookings now.
She is.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
happened to Sioux Falls?
She's got two babies,
Is
and
she married again now?
she's engaged to a guy that's going to school to be a PA, I think.
Oh, good for
All
her.
right. I'm going to admit to everybody it is 7 o'clock.
Hmm.
Okay. Got one more person that's joining here and then we'll get started. Okay. Well, it is 7 o'clock. We will get started. Thank you all for joining Northeast South Dakota AHEX monthly EMS education. Just a couple reminders. I know we did not get certificates emailed out to you for last month. We will do both of those here after tonight's session, if you were in part of the last month's session. We will be taking a break in October, I believe, due to the South Dakota EMS Association Conference. We encourage you to attend the EMS conference if you can. There is a online or virtual session for those as well. Those will be published about a week after the actual conference. So if you don't know how to get registered for that, go to the South Dakota EMS Association website and you can register for conference and you can choose the virtual option if you like as well. So with that, I will introduce Mr. Troy Breitig from Lake Area Votech, or Technical College, I guess it is now. He is one of the instructors there. I have had the privilege of knowing him for several years and asked him to present for us tonight. So go ahead, Troy. I gotta unmute you, I guess. Can you unmute yourself?
There, now we're good.
There we go.
Sorry, technology, I don't do well with it. Oh, hello, those of you that know me, hello. Those of you that don't, my name is Troy. Just to give you a little brief introduction about myself. I've been in EMS. I started probably a little over 30 years ago in the National Guard. And then became a EMT paramedic, and now I finally retired from actively working as an EMT or paramedic and firefighting, and now I just teach at Lake Area. So I've been doing that for almost 20 years now, and I am happy to say that I thoroughly enjoy teaching. And as much as I enjoyed doing the job, teaching has probably been the most rewarding job I've ever had. So that's about me. This is maybe going to be a little bit different presentation or way of doing continuing ed than what you've done before. I put together a little brief outline. Not going to do a picture show. I just like to have a conversation. And if you have anything you want to add in, if you have a question, if you want to talk about a call that's related to the topic that we are talking about at the moment, please don't be afraid to chime in. I don't like listening to myself talk, and trust me, you'll probably get bored listening to me too. So let's make it a conversation, have a little fun with this, and see what we can help each other, not necessarily learn, but remember maybe. Okay. So the first thing, I mean, Sheila wanted me to talk about farm related incidents. I think this is this kind of continues to become a broader and broader topic. I mean, you can wrap in farm equipment and grain bins and manure pits and all kinds of things that, and the potential severity of the accidents or patients that you might run into in farm related incidences just keep getting more complicated. So I mean, you might have somebody trapped in a grain bin You might have somebody, I don't know about you guys, wherever you're at, but the bees here around Watertown have been absolutely insane. So you might have somebody have an anaphylactic reaction in a tractor cab. Would not surprise me right now with all the bees that are around here. Anyways, makes me wonder what winter's going to be like right now. So let's start. I just made a little outline here. And again, please don't be afraid to chime in if you have anything to add. The one thing that's always out there that we can run into in any situation, electricity. Whether that's, you've got cars that drive themselves now, you got tractors that are driving themselves. Things get in the way, things go wrong with technology. All of a sudden, you've got a down power line or something like that. What do? Where's the safest place for that person to be in the situation, whether it's a car accident or a piece of farm equipment? Safest place for them to be is to stay in the vehicle. What we don't know about electrical lines or power lines is we don't know whether it's a power line for sure or not. So for us, if you've ever been a student in my class, you've heard me say this before: hope for the best and plan for the worst, or assume the worst. When you're talking about power lines, we have to assume that it's live. We have to assume that it's energized. And don't forget, if there is a down power line and it is energized, it's going to create a ground gradient situation where you're not going to see the electricity, whether that line is arcing and bouncing or not. It has the potential to create an area of electrified ground, and you're not going to know that it's there until you step into it and turn yourself into a hot dog on a spit. So you have to be aware. One of the first things that we learn as EMTs, your safety is paramount. You have to keep your head on a swivel. You have to be constantly looking for things that are a threat or might become a threat. And sadly, there are those things that we can't see. And if you don't slow down and try to gather as much information that you can visually, things that you might hear, things that you might smell, clues that would indicate to you where that threat might be or what might be a threat to you. If you go rushing in with tunnel vision, you're going to miss something, and it's very likely going to be your opportunity to become part of the problem or a victim instead of part of the solution. So that's going to be my focus here tonight, is to just try to touch on things to help you remember the basics and things that I think we all need to remember to help protect ourselves so that we can help other people. Livestock related injuries, whether it's somebody that gets crushed between a couple of panels because a cow gets crazy or a horse gets spooked or whatever the case might be. I'm sure a number of you have been on different calls related to livestock. And like many things, it's impossible to really define exactly what that scenario might be. So there's a lot of different things that we have to keep in mind. Again, what are the things that might cause a threat to you? Is that animal still able to get access to you? Have they been able to somehow isolate it from the incident so that you don't have to worry about that? But again, your head needs to be on a swivel. And I guess whether you're the EMT or the paramedic on the call, and remember, if you're the driver or the assistant, it's even more imperative that your head stays on a swivel so that you can identify what might become a threat to your coworker. You're a team. You got to protect each other and do whatever you have to make that happen. Equipment related situations or injuries. So some of the things that we learn right away. I don't know how many of you are farmers or have experience with farm equipment. I did not grow up on a farm. Later in my life, I actually did have a tractor and I did have a snow blower, so I had some access to or exposure to a PTO, but it's very limited. I have nothing but the utmost respect for powered equipment like that. I'm probably a little bit, I guess it's probably one of those situations where a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous, but for me, I kind of take it to the other extreme. I'm afraid of it. I am not afraid to admit I'm a little scared of what it can do. I've seen what it can do. I don't want it to happen to me, and I don't want it to happen to anybody else. But we all know that in our society nowadays, time is money, and everybody is always short of time. So the more shortcuts you can take, the more time you can serve until you get caught in a PTO or something like that. Um, I don't know how to run equipment. Most of the farm equipment that's out there, I look at it and it's amazing, right? The technology that's involved in all of these things, these pieces of equipment nowadays, I couldn't begin to tell you how to turn it on, turn it off, or back it up, or untangle someone from it. If you don't know that, trying to do what you think is the right thing to do might be the exact opposite of what needs to be done. You might end up causing more harm. So don't think that you're going to come in and save the day pushing buttons and levers and all that kind of stuff. You may end up causing more problems than already exist. So make sure that there's somebody there that knows how to run that equipment. Um, Sheila, I'm going to stop and ask you. I don't know. I'm trying to do this through a computer, and I always wonder how I'm coming through on the other side. Are you hearing me too well, or am I talking too loud or too soft?
You're sounding great, Troy.
All right. Um, so again, I guess, PTOs, make sure that the guards are there. And again, don't try to be the hero. If you don't know how a piece of equipment works, find out from somebody who does and let them take that responsibility. Um, Grain bins, getting to be that time of the year when we're getting ready to start filling them if we're not already. And so there's always a constant threat of someone being trapped in a grain bin. I've never personally been on a grain bin call. I have a friend of mine who actually was trapped in a grain bin and actually survived. Um, he was very lucky. Um, this time of the year, if you were in a grain bin, it's probably like a microwave oven. Um, 3, 4 months from now, they turn into freezers. So some of the things that we need to be thinking about, first and foremost, as an ambulance crew, you are not equipped in any way, shape, or form to try to help someone in a grain bin situation or a confined space situation or a manure pit situation. Maybe if you have a rope, you could throw it to them and try to pull them out, but that's about it. Trying to be that person who's going to save that person's life in those situations is probably going to get you killed. And there's just not much room for error, and there's certainly not much forgiveness in those situations. Got to remember, in some situations, you just have to simply remember or realize that you did not put that person in that situation. And in many cases, they're probably not savable. They may not even be alive anymore. But as an ambulance crew, what you need to be focusing on is, what do I need to have ready to save this person's life or help to save their life once they get out of that situation? The fire department or the rescue team or whoever it is going to be tasked with trying to get that person out. Your job is to be ready to save them once they get on your stretcher and in your ambulance. So what do you need to be thinking about? They're probably going to be hypoxic. In the wintertime, they will without a doubt be hypothermic. The person that I knew that somehow managed to survive, he described uncontrollably shaking because he was so cold for hours. It just, he's like a popsicle. So thinking about shock, remember, shock is quite honestly the easiest or the best way to think about shock, as far as I'm concerned, is in the end, it is the thing that just about every one of us is going to die as a result of. Whether you have a heart attack, an anaphylactic reaction, you're bleeding, we all die pretty much because of some form of shock. And somebody's trapped in a grain bin. It's no different. How do I take care of them? Well, at the EMT level, your your treatment for shock is about as simplistic as it can get. You're going to put them on oxygen, you're going to keep them warm or get them warm, and you're going to position them and you're going to drive, or call for an ALS assist, or in the case of a grain bin, you probably will have time, depending on your access to a helicopter or that type of assistance. You're probably going to have more than enough time to get them on scene or close enough to be able to justify using them. And that may be another thing to think about as far as saving their life. But that's where your emphasis needs to be, is what do I need to be prepared to do so that I'm not digging in cupboards trying to find a piece of equipment or whatever the case might be, a hot pack or something like that. I want to have all that stuff ready so that as soon as my patient gets in the ambulance, I'm able to do everything I have to do right away. Again, my biggest thing, you're going to hear this, you're probably going to get tired of hearing this. Don't be a hero. There's a difference between being a hero and a savior. You know, the savior is there to save you once you get to them. It's not your job to get people out of the situation they're in sometimes, especially if it has the potential to cause harm to you.
Roy, one of
Yeah.
the comments in the, or one of the comments in, or that Corolla has made is crush injury considerations.
Are you talking about in a grain bin situation?
I believe so.
I am, Troy. So when you think about all of the weight, so when you're trapped in corn and you look at all of the weight, it's kind of like when a ditch collapses, kind of the same thought processes.
Exactly the same.
Yep. So I think we need to keep that into consideration. I've watched new surgeons basically not have an understanding of farm injuries, if you will. And then we say it's a crush injury and they have absolutely no concept of the amount of weight that corn or dirt or any of those things can actually put up on a body.
Yeah, and that's what it's just another reason why, as an ambulance crew, you know, at the very most, I would imagine you're going to have 3 people on an ambulance crew. If someone is in a grain bin, especially if there's any activity causing that grain to move, that person, and they can be causing that movement themselves just by trying to get out of the situation, they can literally cause that grain to start shifting, and literally it sucks them down further into the mass of grain. And once that starts happening, the further down they get, every breath they take, that grain starts to apply pressure on their chest. And every breath they take is going to get smaller and smaller because they're not going to be able to inhale adequately to get that tidal volume that they need, because it's just not allowing their chest wall to expand. And pretty soon they'll be lucky if they're able to pant like a dog. It's just, it's crazy. If you've never seen a grain, there's a lot of different entities out there anymore that have grain bin simulators to create the effect and what you would have happening in those situations. And the further down a person gets sucked into that pile of grain, it's almost like quicksand. Or I don't know if a better way to put it, it's almost like getting sucked into a semi-hardened cement. You're not going to be able to just grab their hand and pull them out. There's like a suction developing in there. And if you applied enough pressure, if they were deep enough in there, you could literally probably pull them in half. So that's why I'm saying also that you're not equipped to get them out of this situation. We have fire departments that have equipment that basically what they'll do is they'll put a small little tube. There's a couple of different configurations and designs to it, but you're going to put a tube or construct a tube around them and push it down into the grain so that you can separate them as best you can from the rest of the grain bin. And literally you're going to either suck out the grain that's directly in contact with them, between them and this little tube that you put in there, or you're going to literally scoop it out. You're trying to release the pressure or the suction around that body so that you can get them out. And I hope I'm creating enough of an illustration of about what happens in those situations. But again, the point I'm really trying to emphasize here is there is nothing that you can do as an ambulance crew to just think you're going to drop down in there and pull them out. I don't know about you, but I don't know how you're even going to get up to some of these grain bins. They're not really, I mean, they are a confined space. They are not designed for human inhabitants. And there is just too many different ways that creates a life-threatening situation for us as healthcare providers. I don't know if there's anything new out there, but from what I've seen, the best way to try to get someone out, if you can get to them through the top and put a tube in place, great. Otherwise, excuse me, the most effective way that I've seen is to try to cut I guess, an upside down triangle on a couple of sides of the grain bin so that you can start releasing the grain bin or releasing the grain. And you'll need a tractor or a couple of bobcats or something to scoop the grain away so that you have room for it to continue to spill out. The only thing you have to keep in mind is what's that doing to the person inside the grain bin? It may be causing some unwanted effects to their circumstances or their situation. Just don't know. Again, I don't really know that much about how grain bins are constructed. There might be different methods out there. So goes back to operating equipment. The one thing you don't want to do is operate the grain bin inside. There's pivots inside there or sweepers. If that's still working, shut that off, because if that person gets caught in that, it's not going to be a good day. Running an auger to try to get the grain out, I don't know how those work in the grain bin exactly. It may or may not be a good idea either. So just gotta think about what you're doing. Find some people that understand what's going on, how the equipment works, and try to come up with a plan that's going to allow you to do the best that you can with the circumstances you're dealing with. Yeah, somebody said punch a hole in the side of the bin. Yep. As far as I know, that's about the only thing that you can do. And the only thing that you got to be concerned about when you're doing that is, I mean, these things are basically corrugated metal. I don't know how thick that is, but you do have to be concerned when you're doing that. You got to be concerned about the integrity of the grain bin itself. So you can't just go and pepper the thing with holes, because then you're going to risk having it, the bin itself may fail, and then you've got other people that are in harm's way as well. So lots of little things when you're dealing with those kinds of things. You cannot afford to have tunnel vision. You got to be thinking about the big picture. Anybody have any comments, remarks, stories they'd like to share about anything we've talked about so far? I had to ask. I figured I'd know the answer to the question. All right. Okay.
You're doing great, Troy.
What?
You're doing great.
Okay. So when we talk about farm accidents or farm related situations, I can't help but go back to one of my favorite stories, and one of my least favorite stories at the same time, involving youth and farm accidents. So middle of the day, yeah, many years ago now. I can't remember how old this young man was, but I want to say he was somewhere probably around 8 or 9, 8, 9, 10, maybe at the most. Dad was hauling a load of grain to the elevator, and the son was on a 4-wheeler driving behind the grain bin. As you would expect, young man that age probably doesn't have a lot of experience driving on a road. Doesn't understand that red lights on the back of a vehicle mean that it's braking. And I don't know how fast they were going, but Dad had to hit the brakes on the grain bin or the grain truck, and the son ran into the back of the grain bin, The impact, basically, in my mind, I imagined him being launched off of the four-wheeler, and he basically did a lawn dart with his head into the back of the grain bin. We got called, we met them on the highway. I opened the back of the ambulance while we were en route. I was in the back trying to get some stuff ready, what I thought I might be dealing with, and opened the back doors of the ambulance, took a couple of steps out, and Dad practically threw the boy into my arms. I looked down at his face, at his head, and he was at best semi-responsive. He was kind of moaning, but I could not help but notice right above his forehead, there was an obvious depressed skull fracture. And got him in the back of the am, got him on the cot, and I no sooner got him laid on the cot and looked up at one of the guys that was in the ambulance with me, and I was going to tell him about the depressed skull fracture, and I looked back down at this young man, and the skull fracture was no longer there. The swelling had pushed that depression back out just that fast. So the reason I'm bringing up this tale is a number of things. First of all, I think this may be something where you see farm kids or youth involved in farm accidents more and more. I don't think that's always a potential, right? But the reason I wanted to talk about that in particular is things change very quickly when you're talking about trauma with machinery or vehicles or any of this kinds of stuff. And not only do we need to be aware of our surroundings, but if we are so focused on little things, we're going to miss the big things. That might be scene assessment or scene survey things like down power lines, like whether or not the person was seat belted, whether they had a helmet, what happened to the helmet, were there airbags deployed, what happened to the steering wheel, was there damage to the steering wheel? The things that we need to remember to think about. There's a, as we went through EMT training or paramedic training, we learned to speak in alphabet, right? All these OPQRST and MOIs and you name it, whatever. But that one in particular is one that we need to think about a lot and remind ourselves to think about. What was the mechanism of injury? What is my index of suspicion? What do I need to be thinking about that's wrong? Hasn't shown its face yet, but it's there. And I'm afraid that based on my mechanism of injury and the amount or the degree to which the hair is standing up on the back of your neck, or that voice in the back of your head is saying, this is not going to be a good show. Things are going to be happening here. I just know they are. They haven't started yet. And all of a sudden, your heart rate starts going up if it's not already. And then all of a sudden, your blood pressure starts dropping because they're bleeding internally. Think about the mechanisms of injury that you might be dealing with. Always. And again, go back to one of my favorite sayings. I've got favorite words. I've got favorite sayings. If you've ever been in class, you've heard them all, but hope for the best and plan for the worst. Maybe that wasn't a depressed skull fracture. If it wasn't, then what else was it, right? But thinking about what you need to be preparing for before it happens. Hopefully it doesn't happen. But if you have the reason to believe that your patient is going to be suffering from internal bleeding, be aggressive. Treat for shock before it happens. Don't wait for them to start shivering before you start putting blankets on them or turning up the heat in your ambulance. Do that right away. Put them on oxygen. Start with a nasal cannula, but be ready. Be aggressive. That's how you get to be the savior. Doing the things that you can be proactive and prepared to do and not make that person wait for those treatments. So why was that my least favorite call? Well, Mostly because it could have been easily prevented. How? Well, maybe a 10-year-old or someone under that age shouldn't be driving a four-wheeler on a gravel road following a grain truck. But if they are, the least they could do is put a helmet on. I'll never forget the surgeon that was waiting for me when I got to the hospital. Was if he would have been a police officer, I'm pretty sure he would have arrested that parent. He was pretty hot that this kid was on a four-wheeler and at least didn't have a helmet on. I'm pretty sure he would have arrested that dad that day if he could have. Things like that can be prevented. It was one of my favorite stories because things happened right in front of my eyes, and they happened so fast that if I wouldn't have looked down at that kid's head, I would have missed that skull fracture. And as it turns out, he did have a skull fracture, and I believe that the kid survived, but I honestly, I can't remember details of whether he did or how he turned out afterwards. But just from the standpoint of how fast things changed and developed in his condition was just amazing to me. But anyways, all right, take a break and see if anybody has anything to add or questions about anything. That's what I wanted to talk about. If there's anything that anybody else would like to talk about as far as farm related situations, that was kind of the list that I had put together. And then I wanted to change into a different topic, or kind of carry on maybe with the same topic that we were talking about as far as things we need to do to go back to basics. Okay. Being aggressive and being proactive. What to do or what to-dos I have on my list here. So we've all heard the saying that speed kills, right? Usually we're talking about vehicle accidents, but I want to emphasize the point that I brought up earlier about tunnel vision on our part. Tunnel vision can kill just as much as speed. If you do not slow your speed down as you are approaching a victim or approaching a scene, you will miss valuable clues and valuable information that will help you with your mechanism of injury, your index of suspicion, all of those things. And we're not always just talking about trauma. It's not always a mechanism of injury. We can miss important clues in a medical situation just as much as a trauma situation. So slow down, take a deep breath. When you open the door to the room your patient's in or the area that you're in, stop, take a breath, look around, try to gather as much information. Oh, speaking of down power lines, I forgot to bring something up. Transformer boxes, ground-mounted transformer boxes. Another interesting tale. Bring it up so that it's a reminder to all of you. But transformer boxes, we're burying power lines more than we are putting them above head or above ground anymore. And it's great because it cuts down on the power outages when we have blizzards. But from our standpoint, they create very unique hazards. Another story that I can tell you about because I was lucky enough to survive, because I was lucky and everybody that was with me was lucky because we didn't do what we should have done. We got tunnel vision. We had a vehicle accident in an intersection in the country. There was an elderly couple that was in a vehicle upside down. The wife was unresponsive, still strapped in her seatbelt, hanging upside down. The husband had gotten out of the vehicle somehow. And so right away, all we could see was the vehicle in the intersection. And without even hesitating, everybody, and we had 2 or 3 person ambulance crew. And shortly after the ambulance arrived, we had a fire truck on scene with the crew from the fire department as well. Nobody, not one person, did a 360-degree assessment of the scene, of the incident, of the vehicle involved until we were done. And lo and behold, here sat a transformer box that the car had sheared the top off of, and it was sitting there exposed. How none of us or anybody else in that situation got hurt or didn't get hurt, I cannot tell you. But that is my most vivid and lucky description of why it is so important that we always remember to get a 360-degree eyes on everything we possibly can, and to slow down, to allow ourselves to not just remember to do that, but to do it. And don't rely on somebody else to do that for you. Don't assume that just because there's maybe a sheriff or a highway patrolman on scene that there's no hazards, that person, they're there maybe 5 or 10 minutes before you get there. Don't assume that they did that and that there are no hazards. Make sure that you are doing that for yourself. Okay. Slow down, slow down, slow down. Okay. More back to basics. Whether you're an EMT or a paramedic, it's very easy to get complacent. It's also very easy to start forgetting things. I'm almost 58 years old, and I'm starting to think maybe I need to start taking some of those things I see on TV to help with memory sometimes. It's also very easy to get hooked on the fancy equipment, the bells and whistles, the technology, all that stuff. But let's face it, whether you want to believe it or not, the things that, especially at the EMT level, and even at the paramedic level, we talk about it all the time, but everybody still wants to focus on all the fancy bells and whistles, the technology. The things that save people's lives in our business are airway management, making sure that we're treating for shock as aggressively as possible, and just the little things. There's no bells and whistles. I mean, I don't think there's anything that's shiny or sparkly or technology based with an oxygen bottle and a non-rebreather, or a BVM. A blanket, keep somebody warm. Don't forget, one of the best ways to warm someone, since we're coming, I don't want to talk about it too much, but winter's coming. But just a reminder, one of the best ways to warm someone who is truly that cold is get under the blanket with them, and use your body heat to warm them. But basic care, it's the hallmark of everything that we do. It's the first thing that we do. Don't get complacent about the importance of that. Take the time, recognize, what am I looking at? Remember your basic assessment skills: airway, breathing, circulation, ABC. There's also a couple of other letters that we all get introduced to, but we kind of tend to forget about them. So ABC and D and E. What does D stand for? Depending on what your source is, it might stand for disability, maybe deformity. So disability, usually we're talking about a medical situation with a stroke symptoms or something like that. I don't know what you guys all use, but to me, I prefer to always keep things as simple as possible. I'm really not that smart. So anything I can do that keeps things simple, that's the way to go. For me, I haven't found anything that's more simple than the Cincinnati stroke scale. So ask them to smile, ask them to repeat a phrase, ask them to close their eyes and lift their hands up. If they have any kind of disability, we're probably talking about a stroke. And don't forget, there's just a few people in the world anymore that have diabetes. And there's just as many people that know they have diabetes that don't know they have diabetes. We're very likely to run into an increasingly larger and larger number of situations that may have started off as a medical situation and end up being a trauma call for us. And again, if we don't take the time and slow down to try to gather information in our scene assessment, we might miss the fact that this person's got a bracelet on that says they're a diabetic, or nowadays a tattoo maybe, or what have you. Maybe they have a pump that somehow got ripped off of them in the car accident, or whatever the case might be. Things that would lead you to believe that they maybe have a diabetic problem, or that they had some kind of medical problem that led to the accident. in the first place. So again, focus on the clues that are there. E, A, B, C, D, and E. What does E stand for? Well, expose. In this part of the world, it might also stand for exposure. So yes, we need to, at the very least, we need to get someone's shirt off, right? Maybe we need to cut their pants off so we can see that, but is it important? Yeah. But I would argue that it's more important to get their shirt off right away, to look for signs of trauma to their chest, trauma to their abdomen, things that are going to lead you down that road of what are the life threats that I'm dealing with. Unfortunately for us, bruising does not occur very quickly, but maybe they've got a seatbelt burn. Maybe they've got some kind of an abrasion from the airbag and the steering wheel. I don't know, whatever options there might be out there, but we cannot see those things unless we expose. The other thing that you cannot see unless you expose, maybe they have open heart surgery scar, the old zipper scar down the center of their chest. Maybe they have a defibrillator or a pacemaker. I don't consider myself to be the poster child for someone who has a pacemaker. I like to think that I take care of myself. And if you looked at me, you probably would never guess. But yeah, I do have a pacemaker, thanks to COVID. And if you wouldn't expose my chest, you wouldn't see that I had a pacemaker. That might lead you down to the path to think, well, he was in a car accident. Maybe his heart was a problem before the car accident. Maybe he lost consciousness before the impact. Just things like that you need to think about. But we go back to the exposure part. In this part of the country, we have extremes of temperature. It's either way too hot or way too cold. And in the summertime, when it's way too hot, we also, contrary to what a lot of people who've never been in this part of the country before don't realize, is we have a boatload of humidity sometimes. And exposures can be a big problem for both medical and trauma patients, especially if they're laying on an asphalt road or laying on cement or laying out anywhere. Their body, especially in the wintertime, their body's already struggling to compensate. And if we don't do something to combat the cold and prevent them from having to expend all of their energy trying to stay warm, they're going to pass away that much faster because their body can't keep up with the demands of compensating for the threats that they're experiencing and trying to keep them warm. So again, A, B, C, D, E. We got to think about the D and the E, I think, a lot more than maybe what we emphasize in our training sometimes. Shock. Wow, this is going a lot faster than I anticipated it would. Again, ultimately, it's what we all die of, one way or another. Some things that we got to think about with shock. If there's bleeding involved, every drop of blood counts. We want to conserve or prevent the loss of every single drop of blood that we possibly can. If there's bleeding involved, if it's significant enough to create a pool under your patient, they've lost a lot of blood, and good chance their skin color, temperature, and condition is going to suck. So no, they're pale, they're cool, probably diaphoretic, at least clammy. It's because they've lost too much blood. Their body can't compensate for the loss. So try to figure out where that bleeding is coming from as soon as possible. Put your gloved hand or a gloved finger on that blood vessel if you can find the spot that's bleeding, and clamp it off as fast as you can. Depending on the circumstances, if there's a significant amount of blood, don't hesitate to put a tourniquet on. Don't waste your time other than to put your gloved hand in there to try to stop that bleeding as fast as possible. Have your partner get you a tourniquet and have them help you get that tourniquet in place so that you don't allow for any more blood loss. Practice with your tourniquets. There's a number of different styles and manufacturers out there. Don't wait until you actually have to use one to figure out how it works. What you have on hand is what you have. Take it out of the package and practice with it. It's still going to be clean and usable. for you to put back in your ambulance, back in your jump bag, whatever the case might be, but practice with it so that you know how to put it on as quickly as possible. Don't be looking for instructions on how to apply it and where the Velcro goes or how to twist the stick or whatever the case might be. Those are things you got to know. You probably learned how to do it in EMT class or in your paramedic class, but is the tourniquet the same model, the same manufacturer that you used in school as what you have on your rig? And even if it was, when's the last time you put a tourniquet on somebody? You know, I don't think, I have to stop and think about it, but I don't believe in my 24 years as a paramedic, I don't believe I ever had to put a tourniquet on anybody. All right. So again, I didn't have to worry about the equipment that was in an OB kit until about 3 months before I retired. And I actually had a childbirth about 3 months before I retired. Never had anything close to a childbirth until 3 months before I retired. Opening up that OB kit for the first time didn't look anything like the OB kit I had when I was in class. So it was a fumble effect to try to figure out where everything was at. Just trying to find the alligator clips for the umbilical cord was kind of an adventure. So again, think about the basic things that you need. The things that are going to save someone's life are the easy things that you can do, but they're also the easiest things to forget how to use. There's no bells and whistles with a tourniquet. There's no bells and whistles with an OB kit. There's no bells and whistles with just using your gloved hand to apply direct pressure to a wound. You just have to do it. You have to practice it. I tell my students in class now, we're going to practice until we can't get it wrong. And you're all trained. There are things, whether you want to admit it or not, there are things that we've all forgotten, and it's going to be something different for all of us. Don't wait to go on a call to find out the things that you've forgotten. Okay. So again, with shock, easiest skill sheet there was for most of us in EMT class. Positioning, and nowadays we don't really concern ourselves with elevating the feet. We just want to get them supine to try to facilitate as much systemic blood flow everywhere, especially the brain, that we can. Keep them warm, put them on oxygen, and tell your driver, let's get to the hospital as fast as we can, as safe as we can. And if you have to, call for ALS intercept, but that's about it, right? The key things is thinking about your mechanism of injury, your index of suspicion. Is this patient in shock now? And if they're not, are they going to be? Should I put a blanket on them? Yes. Turn up the heat in your ambulance. It's okay if you're sweating. Your patient's probably not worried about it. And they probably won't mind a couple of drips of sweat and dropping on them patient as they stay alive. They're probably going to thank you for it. Okay, with that, I'm going to ask one more time if anybody has anything they want to talk about. Do I have 10 minutes, Sheila?
You do.
Okay. So I've got one other thing. It's a kind of a related, but unrelated. I don't want you to think that it's a sales pitch. One more time. Anybody have anything they want to comment or add? Okay. I think all of you are probably aware. There's somewhat of a EMS provider shortage in the state of South Dakota and in the country and around the world. There's only so much that can be done, but you know, I've heard other places of comments, ideas that people have had. Well, we should train high school students to become EMTs. I do have a profound problem with that. I think about some of the things that I was exposed to early in my career. And if I was 15, 16, 17 years old, even 18 years old, maybe, I don't know that I would have